Protests against police in the U.S. by Learn with News. Level 3. Mass protests have been taking place all across the U.S. after a Minneapolis police officer was videoed killing a black man. The man, George Floyd, was under arrest for using a counterfeit $20 bill. The video shows him being held on the ground by the police officer, Derek Chauvin. In the video, Chauvin is seen pressing his knee hard into George Floyd's neck. George Floyd repeatedly told Chauvin and the other officers on the scene that he could not breathe. Chauvin held his knee on Floyd's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. George Floyd was dead for minutes before Chauvin removed his knee. The killing caused outrage across the U.S. This is the latest in a long history of police brutality, particularly against black people in the U.S. There have been protests after police killings of black people in the past, but this time the protests have been bigger than ever. There have been protests in every state of the U.S., with thousands of people turning out in major cities across the country. In Minneapolis, protesters even took over the police station where the officers who killed George Floyd worked. The protests against police brutality have garnered attention around the world. As protesters have been speaking out against the brutality of police, there have been even more cases of police brutality. There are videos of police attacking innocent people, shooting peaceful protesters with rubber bullets, and even attacks against journalists. Journalists from multiple countries have been attacked, which has put police in the U.S. under even more scrutiny. Videos of police brutality during the protests have been shared across the web each day and have made the protests even bigger than they were. In Washington, D.C., the current protests are the largest that the city has ever seen. In reaction to the brutality of police against protesters and journalists, protests have even spread to other countries. There have been protests in the UK, France, South Korea, Canada, and many other places. International protests have largely been about the treatment of minorities in the protesters' own countries, but also in support of U.S. protesters. In Bristol, UK, protesters tore down a statue of a local slave trader from the 1700s, dragged the statue across the city, and dumped it in the harbor. The anger against injustice has reached a boiling point in many places. The actions of protesters around the world calling for the equal treatment of all people have been the biggest in decades.